Welcome to the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York. I'm Karen Taylor, Program Director for the General Society, and absolutely delighted you could be here this evening. We really have a special treat in store for you tonight. I would like to acknowledge that the Labour, Literature and Landmark Lectures are supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. A little background on the General Society for those of you who this may be your first visit. The Society, a non-profit organization, was founded in 1785 by the skilled craftsmen of the City of New York. Today, this 229-year-old organization continues the tradition of improving the quality of the life of the people of the City of New York through its educational, philanthropic, and cultural programs. These include its tuition-free Mechanics Institute, the General Society Library, of which of course you're in now, and its nearly 200-year-old lecture series. Tonight's lecture continues that distinguished tradition and is one of 5 Labour lectures that have provided a behind-the-scenes look at the creative industries in New York City, focusing on the talented artists who are behind the scenes. The majority of the series was curated by Beverly Miller, president of the local United Scenic Artists 829. I would also like to extend our thanks to the New York Landmark Conservancy for their help in promoting tonight's event. I also want to mention that after tonight's lecture, there'll be a short wine and cheese reception that we hope you will stay for. To introduce tonight's speaker, I'm very pleased to introduce to you the Executive Director of the General Society, Victoria Dengel.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's speaker, Thomas Stein, is the construction project manager of the Shubert Organization theaters. He will discuss maintaining New York's theaters for today and tomorrow. The Shubert Organization has been at the forefront of American theater since the start of the 20th century and currently owns or operates 17 Broadway theaters and has produced hundreds of plays and musicals. Mr. Stein will describe in detail how he oversees the practical operations of these theaters, as well as outlining future plans for developing the theaters, particularly the Belasco Theater. Thomas Stein has over 3 decades of experience in the construction field. During the first decade of his career, he was a tradesman working as a carpenter. He ran his own general contracting company and has held management positions in both the public and private sectors. Mr. Stein earned a diploma in construction management from NYU's Real Estate Institute and a Bachelor of Science from Pace University. I should also mention that Thomas Stein is a very valued and active member of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen. And ladies and gentlemen, Thomas Stein.
Very nice. Thank you. Nice to see you all. The title of my talk tonight is about maintaining Broadway theaters for today and tomorrow. And when we speak of that, we speak about maintaining, improving, and planning for the future use of the theater, and it's been my great pleasure to be part of. There are, when we think of planning for the theaters, we consider many different types of stakeholders in these theaters. We have certainly probably the most important, the theater-going public. And we have to address their needs. They want a comfortable place. They want a place they can get around easily, find their way around. We have the theater owners, certainly, who are stakeholders. They want a theater that is attractive to producers, that will be used by the public consistently. Actors who want a stage in a certain way. They also want to feel safe and during their quiet hours in their dressing rooms. We have the staff, both front of house, being house managers, ushers, ticket takers, and back of house, stage hands, wardrobe people, wigs. There's a whole host of people. And each one has special needs. And then there's the general public we have that wants things done generally in an environmentally sound way. There is a movement called Broadway Goes Green that is encouraging the theater owners to do as much as they can to reduce energy use, and we certainly pay attention to that whenever we are planning projects. So I have a slideshow. We're going to do this sort of old school, not PowerPoint. So imagine we're home. I've just come back from a vacation, and I've got my slide projector out. You'll hear everything except the mechanical click, click between slides. So let's see if we can get this up and going. A lot of the pictures you're going to be seeing are from two projects I've been involved with, the Belasco Theater restoration and the Longacre Theater restoration. Reasons for that are that, let's see, they're interesting projects, certainly, and they're also very well documented. A lot of these photos, I've taken some of them. A lot of them were taken by Francesca Russo, who is an architect that does quite a bit of work for the Shubert Theater, the Belasco Theater in particular, she was involved in, and Rick Rogers, who's the house electrician at the Longacre Theater. So I want to thank both of them for their photos. So this is a picture of the Belasco Theater looking back from the stage. And through the work of a lot of talented artisans and tradespeople, it became that after about a year of a lot of hours and a lot of work. Just to show you, give you some idea of what was done here. It's a pretty dynamic change, but this is interesting. This was an original panel that Mr. Belasco, who helped design his theater, had very early. It would tilt down and there would be lights behind there. These are late-day ductwork that was installed just willy-nilly in the theater. When they put in air conditioning, they actually, when ductwork was installed, they cut through a Edward Shin mural to get a duct in. So there wasn't a lot of attention to detail, certainly. These theaters were not built for the ages. They were built by impresarios and entrepreneurs, but the theaters had a history up to this time of every 20 years changing location, moving up Broadway. And I don't think they expected in 1901 or 1907, when this was built, that it would be around 107 years later. So some of what we do is make up for that. This is the proscenium of the Belasco Theater. Excuse me. You can see that this detail here was chopped away to make the stage wider. It originally came out about 3 feet on each side. And that's what it looked like after the restoration. You can see that detail has been redone, but done much smaller than it was originally. There's a new valance. These boxes, which we'll look at in more detail later, had actually been taken out, chopped away. Back in the 70s, when things were not going especially well on Broadway, a lot of these theaters were converted. This one was going to be a dinner theater, and Rocky Horror Picture Show was going to play here, so they ripped out all the seats and they put in dining tables, and part of the work was to remove these boxes so the actors could have a track and run around with it. It ran for 40 performances, closed, and the boxes were never rebuilt until 2010 when we did this restoration. This is the Longacre Theater, before and after. You can see the palette changed considerably. the proscenium at the Longacre with a faux marble painting. And again, over the proscenium arch. Okay, so this is now at the Longacre Theater. I'm going to look at a particular part of this project. This fascia on the bottom of the mezzanine and balcony this was not original, this had been covered up. And there is a pan here, a lighting pan, that was all the rage to put in these theaters. All of our theaters had these at one time. However, they're not terribly attractive. And we knew from historical photos that there was a great deal of plaster detail work under these. We didn't have any idea really what we would find when we opened them up, but this is what we found. So you can see this, and it was this color. So I don't know if it was this color when it was covered up or what, but this is what was seen. And this is a very good section of it, but you can see a lot of it was missing. These are the boxes. So to redo this, we brought in a firm that specialized in plaster restoration, and they started their work. They're putting a framework to mount the plaster to. And this is actually where the gray is the original and the white are new pieces of plaster, thank you, that have been molded and put in place and then carefully, by hand, seamed in. And then you can see here, this bends around. So each one of these panels was a casting that was made from some of the extant plaster that was in the theater. And here you can see it's open because it's bending around. And then this artisan comes through and by hand fills in those spaces and makes it a seamless transition. Quite extraordinary to watch. And this is one that has been completely, the plaster is up there, ready to be finished, ready to be painted. This is the mezzanine. That's the balcony. You can see that work's completed. We've put in, that's been painted. This is newly up. You can just see that some of the gilding has just been done. And these are going to be a new light rail. They have one up there to replace that pan. That's what we're doing for the production. We're giving them as many different areas to hang lights as we can think to do, so they can have a good choice when they come into our theaters. And these two little dots there, that's a sock apex system. And what it is called a patch system. And it's basically a giant extension cord that we put in. So now the shows, instead of having to put up a light and run a wire all the way backstage, they just plug into that. And then backstage, they can plug their equipment in. That saves time on the load-in, saves the producers money, and makes the theater more attractive. So we address some of our stakeholders in that way. Here you can see, again, these little Socopex connectors. Each one of these has 8 circuits, so that's 16 lights can be there. And then each light can be controlled separately. The gilding, you can see, we'll see a little bit of how the artisans do that later on. And here we're experimenting with the color palette. This was not used, but it gives you an idea of what goes on during the transition of the theater. And again, that's finished with, now this is interesting. What they do, what the artisans do is they color this, and then they use what they call glazes, which are very thinned paints, and they wipe them on, let them sit for a short while, and then wipe it off. And all the glaze will come off the high spots and it'll stay in the grooves. It makes it look older, and also, since it's all plaster's all white, it really, you can see the details. It really brings out the details in the plaster. And then one of the last things they do is new upholstery to finish these up. And that's a shot of the house left box, the left of the arch, of the proscenium arch with the faux marble. Now we're back at the Belasco Theater. Excuse me. See these boxes down here. This is well into the rebuilding of these boxes. But you can see the original ceiling. The arch has already been rebuilt. That ceiling has already been repainted. We're doing a lot of work with signage. Obviously, signage is very important to a theater. There's been, these LED signs that are very popular now that are constantly changing. They're not static. That's getting to be something that the theater is going to start to do. I kind of love these older signs, but, the theater has to progress and has to remain competitive with other types of entertainment, and so these are kind of things we need to do. But this is just a poster on there. It's an illuminated poster. The light comes through it. But we've taken that down, and here we're putting up a new LED sign. Give you an idea of how this works. The first thing they've done, we've taken down, these are new rods that have been put into the building, and the superstructure for the sign is being hauled into place. Here it's being set against the building and bolted on. The panels come up and in place, and in relatively no time at all, we have a new LED sign. So, and the actual work's very quick, but the planning can take months. The architect, the engineering for that is rather substantial. And so now we're back at the Belasco Theater. So this is the box that was chopped away, and you can see the bottom box is completely gone. It was just completely flush. Unfortunately, this is a little out of focus, but this gives you an idea of really what it looked like. There was nothing there at all. And so when we started, the first thing they had to do was the steel framework. And what we did was let's see. Right there, that was the old steel that was in place. Not going to use that. And we welded onto it. This was done by Koenig Ironworks, a very talented man named Arturo Sanchez, who does quite a bit of work for us. You'll probably see him in a few of these photos. Now, the structural members have been put in. A pan has been put in that will hold concrete. You can see it from above, and you can see that these are not as far out as the old boxes. The original boxes were in line with the old boxes, but when we looked at it, it seemed that there would be a very problematic sight line, so we decided to pull these back. As Jerry Schoenfeld, who ran the Shubert Organization for many years, used to say to us when we would tell him that we were doing a project and we wanted to get it done like it used to be, he would say, well, what makes you think they did it right the first time? And I think this is a perfect example where that box probably was a problem. So here we're pouring the concrete, and those rods sticking up will be the rails for the box. Fireproofing. Oh, and this box was a very tight fit, and we didn't really consider fireproofing when we were designing it. And so we were worried that these details wouldn't work, but they managed to work. But this is a piece of plaster that has been cast to match the architect's drawing below. This is a mold that's being taken. This is done right in place. The artisans brush this on, let it dry, and then pull it off, and then they use that as a mold to duplicate whatever detail is underneath. And here we're beginning to assemble the plaster on the box. And you can see it looks a little rough when it first goes up, but it is soon made to match very carefully by the skilled men and women in that trade. This is a carved casting. This is, was done freehand by an artisan and then cast. And you can see the one in place. There are many of these. You can see in the box how they ring around. And then we're now in a point where the plaster is starting to work underneath the box, where there'll be lights and little lamps and a light fixture. This is how it looks when they're done. And this is a bracket, a decorative bracket that has been cast and gilded and painted in place. And that's what the box looks like when it's just about completed. And here they are, all back in place, back how Mr. Belasco planned them, a little smaller than that. And this is an interesting little tapestry, a little detail. This was original, matched an original detail. It originally was leather and had little, like, sun catchers sewn into it. There was actual glass sewn into this, both this detail and the house curtain. And there you can see one of these lovely lamps that I call a harem lamp that had been out of the theater for 35 years. They had, sometime in the late 60s, someone had broken in the theater and taken 2 light fixtures off the walls. And since things were pretty wild and woolly then, they just decided they couldn't protect all this lovely Tiffany lighting. So they took it off and put it on shelves, and there it sat for 35 years. And we finally were able to get it back into the theater. It's really quite extraordinary stuff. This is another project we might do. This is for Les Mis, which just arrived at the Imperial Theater a few months ago. And they wanted us to remove a box for them. And it's quite amazing what we do, or what the producers will do to adapt the theater. It can be quite extensive. And although these theaters are landmark, the New York City Landmark Commission has worked with us, and they know that theaters need to be dynamic, so they allow these changes to be done as long as things are put back at the end. And we have developed a very good relationship with them. I think it's trust. They know that Shubert is, or that the theaters in general are doing the right thing, so they allow this. But here we are. We're chopping away the plaster, and again on the side. Then we knock out the bottom, and this is the steel on the inside of the boxes. That's a superstructure. And there is the box. We keep that steel there. We're beginning to rig it, and this is my good friend Arturo Sanchez, who is rigging up the hoist to hoist this out of place. And now he's cutting the steel, and there it goes. It'll be shipped off, and will sit in some warehouse until the long and successful run of Les Mis finishes, and we can put it back. And this is what it looks like with the scenery. And during the show, it looks much like that. I saw the show. I don't remember that ladder being there, but gives you an idea. You see, they've covered up the downstage box with this banister, and to the left is where the upstage box was, and they will have actors come there during the show. And this is, we do work, I just sort of a random shot of the electric. We have upgraded during the big restoration of the theaters. We upgrade the electric in the Belasco Theater, there was an 800 amp service when we started, and we ended up with 2,500 amps. And it's, 800 amps is not really very much, Many houses today, almost every house is 200 or 250 amps. So running a theater on 800 amps was a challenge. And although the lighting gets more efficient as time goes on, there always seems to be more of it. So, we get LEDs, and then sounds like a great idea, and someone then decides we'll have 1,000 of them on a sign. So, although we're getting more efficient, the energy needs still continue to grow. And this is some new switch gear we're putting in one of our theaters. This is a water pump to provide better domestic water for the patrons and into the dressing rooms. Now, this is an interesting piece of equipment. This is a house dimmer. Now, when the shows come in, all the theatrical lights are controlled by the show. They bring in new lights for every show. They set up new lights. They have their own controllers. But the theater lights themselves, the auditorium lights, the house lights that we call, are controlled by permanent equipment. And this is a simple resistance dimmer, and there's a handle on top. And when they dim, a stagehand will turn that, and the lights go down. And, so that's the only control they have. And lighting designers want more control. And so this is a new piece of equipment. This is a new dimmer. It's all computer controlled. And you can see each one of these little drawers is able to control 2 circuits. So now, instead of having just one setting on all the lights in the house, we have 24 different circuits. And they can be made to come up at different rates, come up to different heights, different percentages. So the lighting designer now has as much control as they could possibly want. But to do that, all the lighting in the theater had to be rewired. So that's only done when we have a big restoration going on. And then this is the controller for that, and it says System OK, which makes me very happy, because we do this for a few months and then turn it on. And, this is what we hope for. Doesn't always happen. In the Belasco Theater, one of the features in that theater are murals. They were done by 3 different artists, but the murals in the auditorium were done by a gentleman named Everett Shin, who in his day was really quite famous. He was a member of the Group of 8, or the Ashcan School, which were young, sort of modern painters. They got their name, which was originally a derisive name of Ashcan, because they would draw scenes that might have a garbage can in them. And that was radical. Not everything would be beautiful and palatial, but they would draw everyday scenes, so they got the name Ashcan School, and they embraced it. But this was his work. He did this to a design that Mr. Belasco had envisioned. I did see some workups that Everett Shin had wanted to do, and they were very much sort of Soviet realism. It would have looked quite a bit different. But the boss, Mr. Belasco, was paying the bills, so he got what he wanted. And what was amazing about these murals is that they had been painted over, and I mean with a roller. Someone decided that they would do that. And we actually found a letter to the last original Shubert brother from one of his workers that said, "We finally got around to brightening up the Belasco. We painted it a lovely pale gray." And they did that by painting over these lovely murals. But this gentleman, Jonathan Sherman, who's a mural restorer, and a crew of his, painstakingly worked to get this paint off these murals. And it's kind of an interesting story. They came in originally with all kinds of chemicals and potassium, and oh man, they were just going crazy trying different things to get this paint off, and they ended up using a technique where they took masking tape, they put it on, and they ripped it off. And they got about 85% of the paint off that way, and then they took a surgeon's scalpel and flicked the rest of the paint off. And they did 3 people in about 3 months were able to restore probably about 80% of the murals. Some of them were too much damage. But also, one of the things that worked in our favor was people had smoked in the theaters for many, many years. So there were 60 years of tar on these paintings when they painted them. So there was a barrier of tar between the painting, the oil paints, and the latex paint. So smoking was good for the theater in that sense. And then this is a mural downstairs, and these murals were downstairs were not done by another artist who we only know as the Russian. We don't even know his real name. And he did some really lovely murals of an opera, Rienza. And one of the characters in Rienza it's a Verdi opera, an early Verdi opera, is this cardinal. And as soon as these came back from the restorer, and although the murals in the house couldn't be taken off the walls, these murals were downstairs, and they were able to get them off, clean them, and restore them in their shop. And when they came back, I immediately recognized that the bishop was Mr. Belasco. So, and there he is. So, not bad for a Jewish boy from Seattle. So, who envisioned himself, he may have given himself the nickname the Bishop of Broadway. So, and then this is my one bugaboo is when we finished the job, the powers that be decided that we needed this mural, this monitor right here in front of that great-looking mural. But that's my one complaint. That's it. I would do away with it. There are lovely capitals, column capitals in this theater that are leaded glass, executed by the Tiffany studio. Tiffany, who probably a lot of people here know, was besides the leaded glass lights that he's known for nowadays, was in his era sort of the interior decorator to the stars. His firm did everything. They painted, they did tapestries, they did murals. So he executed this design. It was not his design, but his firm executed it. So this is the columns as we found them. They are beautiful, but they are dirty. And you'll see later there was a lot of baubles hanging on them originally. And this is a turtleback, very typical of a Tiffany light. He used this in a lot of his different light fixtures. And an amazing thing happened. We only had a few black and white photos of the theater from way back. Vanity Fair in 1919 had done an article, and we had that, and so we had some interior shots, but they were black and white, and they were small. And when we had the scaffolding up to work on the theater, on the roof, the head painter, a fellow named Joe Pastor, called me over and said, "Tom, take a look at this." And we found hidden between the column, this is the proscenium wall and the Capitol, this group of glass grapes. And I was able to go back and look at those photos, and when I knew what I was looking for, I could see that they had these around all these columns. So the artisans from Feminella Studios were able to recreate that. They're the people who did, they sort of acted as project manager on all the leaded glass, and they got a number of firms to work on it because our schedule was very tight. And matter of fact, some companies came in and said, "This cannot be done. We're not even going to bid on it." Feminella did and successfully completed the project. So wherever they are, thank you. But this is that, you can see it was just all these years, they just painted around it. But this is what it looks like after we got done. You can see the light has been cleaned. The grapes are there. These hanging little earrings, little baubles are being mounted. And the two gentlemen here, this is Ted Jacoby, who was my co-project manager, who was a third-generation stagehand for much of his career. And you can see there he is on top of that. He's about 30 feet off the ground in his loafers there. And Matt Maloney, the house electrician there. And we were experimenting with LED lights, and we were able to use them. It's kind of amazing what happened with LED lights since 2009 when we started this project. At the beginning of the project in 2009, we didn't think we would be able to use LED lights because we didn't get the color. It was too blue. It didn't dim right. And within 1 year, they had the color right. They were able to dim. And that's been, a few years already. So those things are advancing at amazing speed. Other work we do in just the maintenance, keeping the theater safe. This is an example of a steel beam. The concrete around it is not for structural means, it's for fireproofing. And as you can see, it has been chopped away. And over the years, a lot of this has happened for one reason or another. Shows come in, they want to mount something. This is what happens, and then it's our job to go back and maintain. So an engineer was hired, went around, we found all these places, and you can see this is, they need to hang something, so they do what they need to do, the show must go on, and then we take it from there. But this is this is a piece of steel that has been cut out of the beam, weakening it, luckily not too much, but it had been cut out for some reason. And then this was exposed steel since the theater was built. That's original pour of concrete. So for 100 years, that steel was unprotected. Now, these are all very minor. These are not things that would create a catastrophic failure. Nevertheless, we go around and we patch them and get rid of that problem. And that's a lot of what I spend my time doing. It's great to do these big restorations, great fun, but this is very important work, and I'm happy to do it. And then when we're looking around, we get to find some great things. This is from the Mask Theater, 1934, $3.30 to go to the theater. Did a little research. This is now the, which theater is this? Hold on. Don't go away. See if I can find it real quick. Oh. Let's see. It was renamed the Golden Theater. And did a little research. So in 1934, there were a few shows in there. One was called Tobacco Road, which ended up, it's kind of interesting. It spent 1 month at this theater, 2 days later opened in another theater, and ran for 7 months, and then closed, and 2 days later opened in another theater and ran for 7.5 years. So things were wild and woolly in those days. Why that was done. My guess is that the theater was booked, and no one expected it to do well, and it had to move on. But it ended up being one of the great shows. And a 1914 dime that I always wonder if they leave this stuff for us, And we did find in the Belasco Theater when we had to open up the proscenium on the inside, on the stage side, and we found all these samples of plaster details. And just like we would do today, if we wanted to do something, we'd do mock-ups, and the architect would say, no, that's too big, that's too small. Well, they must have done the same thing. And then instead of throwing them out, they put them up there and they sealed it. And I can only think they did that. It's assuming that someday someone would be opening that to see it. And I got to say, I felt very, very close to the workers who did that. But this we found. It says, I always smoke Chesterfield because they're mild and they taste good. It's my cigarette. And that is Dane Andrews, yeah. And As you can see here, he's starring in a show called No Minor Vices, which is ironic considering the advertisement that he's doing there. And so this is the seating in the theater, obviously key. Probably the biggest complaint after the women not having enough bathrooms are that the seats are very uncomfortable. And, they can be. But seats where we can make more bathrooms, to make bigger seats, we have less seats, and then less people can see the show, and there's less income. So we're certainly leery of doing that. But what we do is everything we can to make the theater. Seats are different sizes. I didn't know this before I started working, but they can be 19 inches, 20 inches, 21 inches. Those are the common sizes. So what we do, at least we get rid of as many of the 19 inches we can. We get 20s, 22 inches, which can make an amazing difference. And then the leg room, with the theater seat design has come along where they're using more modern cushioning material that takes up less space, so we can add an inch in leg room. And all these small changes do make quite a bit of change for comfort. We found this was an interesting problem. Mr. Schoenfeld's idea of what makes you think they did it right originally. This theater had really bad sight lines, so if you were in the back of the mezzanine, you wouldn't be able to see the front of the stage. It was just too flat. So when we did this renovation, we built up the seats, 3/4 inch, 1.5 inches on up, till we added about 5 inches to the top seat. And there you can see it. You can see that stack of plywood up. And then we had to make a ramp up to the new platform, and that's that steel there. And this is another challenge we have, ADA seating for wheelchair seating. Now, this is really more challenging than you might think because a theater is pitched. It pitches in, it pitches down, and that's very uncomfortable for a wheelchair patron. They need to be flat. So how to work this in, it's a particular alchemy that one of my coworkers specializes in. I don't go near, but it's really quite a thing to make a flat surface here. And those metal plates go in. Regular seating bolts into them, and if they're a patron in a wheelchair comes in, the props people come out very quickly, remove that seat, and the wheelchair can be in that place. And here we have the stanchions going in for the seating, the carpet. Even putting in the carpet is really an amazing challenge because each of these arches have to be cut, and you can't lay them out because they're steps. It's quite an ordeal. But the people can do it, the skilled people do it. And what they do is they cut it off-site and bring it all in because time is always of the essence here. So anything they can reduce by doing off-site is helpful. And here are the new seats in I believe that was the Longacre Theater. And then in the Longacre Theater, we were able to add a lounge in the upper part of the theater above the balcony. Before that, if people wanted to use the bathrooms or get a drink, they had to go all the way down. But since we had to do that, we had to get a second means of egress, so we had to put in fire escapes. So this is adding to the safety of the theater by putting in a new set of fire escapes, basically hanging off the side of the theater. And here are the fire escapes well underway. And then the routine maintenance, a leaky leader, common in your own home, maybe, but can be devastating. Water is the bugaboo to all buildings. So here, uninsulated piping, so steam piping. So we want to get that covered to save energy. Here's a crack that is developed. Steel has gotten wet and expanded. And here is a crew doing that. This has just been done in the last year. That's making up for lost time because these buildings weren't, as I said, built for the ages, and then in the 60s and 70s weren't well maintained. So we're still catching up on that. This is a light from the Blasco Theater. This was actually starting to bow As you can see, it shouldn't. So all these came out, and they were restored, and a armature was made up so that they are supported now. So you can rest assured at the Belasco you're safe. And take a look at those lights. They're quite extraordinary. This is something we see around the theater. The stagehands call it a diaper. That's when the roof is leaking during a show. They throw one of these up and give us a call. And so we often are dealing with this kind of thing. And then just I want to see some of the people who do this kind of work. This is a gentleman who's has done all the finish carpentry, Pat, because you'll see his son Pat, and these two men do all that really fine woodworking. And here is a fellow, Chris, an electrician who is getting rid of 100-year-old wire in the Belasco apartment, and for some reason he felt he needed a dust mask. And Triumph Construction, with help from the DEP, tapping into a new water main that allow us to bring a large water main into the theater so we could get rid of the storage tank that was in the basement and the storage tank on the roof and the large fire pump, so we had room for more bathrooms. Because these theaters were not built with a lot of extra room. They were built generally by businessmen, and they wanted what the public didn't see, they didn't want a lot of. We have a pleasure in the Belasco Theater. It was built by someone who was in the theater, impresario, so he left extra room for rehearsals, but that was uncommon. And this is me, and this is where I earned from a very funny guy who was head of the carpentry crew the name Inspector Gadget, which has luckily not stuck, but it did for the rest of that job. And this is Pat Jr. enjoying his work. And Mr. Sanchez, once again, with the project manager from Koenig Ironwork, a fellow named Marshall Green, who was amazing, the amount of work he would do laying out things and making sure things got just right. And not everyone is on our side. These fellows who were pouring concrete from midnight to 6 overstayed their welcome, and this woman was not pleased. And she took a bunch of pictures of everyone, and then I started taking pictures of her. And she, for some reason, didn't think that was fair. But so they did get a huge violation for that, but we got the job done. And that's it. I'll entertain questions if you have any. Anyone? Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Regarding code issues.
Yes.
But being that you're working in 100-year-old plus buildings, particularly with ADA and
Right.
The bathrooms and landmarks and mechanical, do you have go through a lot of challenges with the building department of negotiating waivers and
We
stuff?
do, exactly that. The modern codes do not lend themselves always to older buildings, and the fire department, the building department, landmarks, everybody has been very helpful with us. Sometimes negotiations go on for years. The Justice Department worked with the Shubert Organization for years, getting their theaters as ADA compliant as possible. But it literally took 5 years, and every theater was studied by the Justice Department. And we gotten certain reprieves for some fire codes, although not everything, certainly. And when the fire department feels that something needs to be done, we do it. But there was, for instance, in design, a deluge system. And this was a huge storage of water that would be over the stage. And if there was a fire, the theory was it would come down and sort of put out any fire between the stage and the auditorium. There's already a fire curtain that's hidden up there that would come down and is a big fireproof curtain that would stop flames from going from the auditorium into the theater. And the deluge system, Shubert recognized the problem with that right away, that having 3,000 gallons of water over stage might not be such a great idea. And sure enough, when Mary Poppins was running, they were running I guess it's still running? Well, when it was running, they ran a fire alarm test, and they forgot to disconnect the deluge system. And sure enough, 3,000 gallons of water came down, and the show went on, but Mary Poppins didn't fly that night. So, but they are very good at helping us out with that.
Hello. With waste management and historic preservation, how did that go with your projects?
Well, as far as the waste management goes, we've tried to do some things during the demolition, but I gotta say, I've been fairly unsuccessful in that. For instance, we took apart a stage, and we had lovely beams, 100-year-old longleaf pine beams, and tried very hard to get someone to take them, and actually had a contractor who was going to come, and they didn't show up the day we took apart the stage, and we had no choice but to throw them out, which is just a shame. But in the normal operation of theater, we do a lot of recycling. We separate all the cardboard, all the fluorescent lights get stored and disposed of properly. So in a normal day-to-day, we've had some good success with recycling, but not so much in our construction work, and I think we got to do better.
In terms of landmark interiors, are there thou shalt nots? Are there things you're
No,
prohibited from doing?
many of our theaters are landmarked, and when a theater is landmarked, it doesn't necessarily mean the entire theater is landmarked. Sometimes just the exterior, sometimes just the interior, sometimes parts of the interior. Now, whenever we do a renovation, we've had very good success, because generally what we're trying to do is exactly what Landmarks wants people to do. We're trying to put the theater back the way it was, bring out that lovely details that's gone missing. So we have good success with that, and they've been very accommodating when a show wants to take out a landmark element. And, as long as we put it back, and that, this has been going on now for 15 years, so they're confident we can. So we're really able to do pretty much anything inside the theater for a show, as long as it gets put back at the end. And,
Is that because of your credibility as the Shubert Organization?
well, I imagine I would guess that the first time we did it, and now I wasn't there, but if I was thinking of how that must have been the first time, that was probably pretty dicey. But I guess if you do it once, you do it right. You do it again, you do it right. You do it 5 or 10 times, you do it right. Then the people come to trust you. And so we have good relationship. We're able to get our projects approved quickly, and they can rely on us to do our best to put it back the way it was. And any time you go to the building department, you have to go to landmarks first. So building department won't look at a plan application unless it has already been to landmarks, if it's in a landmark property. And they don't know what's landmark, so they look at the block and lot. And, even if it's something that's not landmarked, one of our theaters, we have to go to landmarks first to get that stamp. So we're watching, they're watching us, and they work with us very nicely. Thank you.
Restoring the Belasco Theater, did you also restore Mr. Belasco's apartment?
Unfortunately, we didn't, but what we did do was when the original air conditioning was put in the late 50s, they ran this ductwork right down the center of his apartment, which wasn't as bad, in my opinion, as cutting through an Edward Shin mural to put in a duct. But we got rid of that. We got that all to the side. We brought up electric there, more panels. So in the future, should someone decide on a good use for that space, it's ready to go. We did there's a lovely triple window in the Belasco apartment. If you're looking at the theater on your right, as you look up, which is a leaded glass, but all clear glass, but patterned glass. It's really quite a thing to see. So we restored that. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to do that apartment someday.
I think the Schuberts have done a great job with the theaters. Their upkeep is wonderful, and I congratulate you on these 2 renovations you talked about. You did the Ambassador and the Shubert as well, right?
In my time that I've been with the Schuberts for 7 years, I know some of the work they did before were, I'm not sure about the Ambassador, but they may have. But they did an entire renovation of the Winter Garden Theater. They did a renovation of the lower lounge in the Music Box, which at the time was owned half by the Schuberts, half by Irving Berlin's family, now owned entirely by the Schuberts. We have done the Belasco, we have done the Longacre completely, the Booth Theater, the auditorium of the Golden, the auditorium of the Schoenfeld. A lot of times, we have to work in dark periods, so it might take a year to do an entire renovation, and that's, you know, what we'll get is sort of a show will come in, not do as well as anticipated. There'll be 4 months of dark period, and they say, you know, have at it, get what you can get done. So, for instance, we're going to be going back into the Schoenfeld, a great show. Bridges of Madison County was in there, but unfortunately didn't do as well as it should have, in my opinion. But we have now a short, dark period where we're going to go back in. We did the auditorium before it came in, and now we're going to be doing a little work in the basement in preparation for the next big push.
Full renovation scheduled for any of the?
Well, we certainly have the Court Theater is one that is very much on the books. The Lyceum Theater is very much on the books. And, you know, the Schuberts plan on doing all their theaters. There are 17 theaters. And, but it takes, even to do a hold at Glasgow, which they were able to take out of circulation, took a year. And that's really the exception. So I guess 17 theaters, I think I got my work cut out for me. So.
The Belasco is gorgeous. Thank you.
I think it was I thank Mr. Belasco. He gave us a great canvas to work with. The Belasco cost about $14.5 million. And I got to say that it could have been done, I think, adequately, cheaper, but there were no stops given to the facilities department. They wanted us to do the best job we could. Yes, ma'am. The workers are local. We use union workers, and they all these special artisans are located here. I imagine that if you were in another city, you might not be so lucky, but we found, plenty for what we needed to do, plenty of really skilled decorative painters, plenty of plasterers, so there seemed to be plenty. Yes, sir. Evergreen, now called Evergreen Arts. They were called Evergreen Plaster, but I think now they've expanded and call themselves Evergreen Decorative Arts. And there are about 3 or 4 firms that do this kind of work, but it's interesting, they use union people, so no matter what firm gets a job, it seems to be the same people. Because the firms have, will have a core of people who work with them full-time, but when they get a big job in that, they'll hire from the union hall, and each firm seems to know who are the best people, because not every union painter can do this kind of work, and they seem to know the good people. So we see the same faces. All right? Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. Go see a show, even off Broadway.
Tom,
Yes.
I would like to thank you so very much for your eloquent and detailed lecture. It was just like a fascinating overview of behind the scenes at the theatre. And we appreciate so much the hard work and research that you've put into this wonderful presentation. So thank you so much for being one of our speakers and for concluding this year's Labour Lecture Series. But we do hope that you will return next year for our Labour, Literature and Landmark Lecture Series. But in the meantime, we would like to make a presentation to Tom. So Tom, this is a citation that Victoria is going to give you.
There's a chain here. And on behalf of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen, again, of which you are a very valued and beloved member, we present you with the Certificate of Appreciation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, my gosh.
And for Meg, we have a memento. And normally we would present you with library members, but as a General Society member, you are an existing library member. But anyway, we hope you'll come back and use the library. Again, I want to thank you this evening for attending, to thank Tom once more, and I hope you'll join us now for some wine and cheese. And possibly you may have some more questions for Tom. Thank you so very much.